Hello there once again, fellow Unity devs. When we last left off, we finally got our enemies and bullets despawning, so now I think it's time to add functionality so we can have different levels. So let's jump right in. So let's go into our bullet hell game manager here, and let's add some static variables to keep track of a few things. So at the top here, let's firstly add a static bool level over equals false, and this will be used to keep track of whether the current level is in progress or not. Then we'll have a static int current level equals 0, and this will be used to keep track of whichever level the player is on. As thirdly, we'll have static int enemies destroyed equals 0. I think this is self-explanatory. Then we have static int enemies despawned equals 0. So this will be the enemies that travel off the world and get despawned. And then finally we'll have static int total enemies equals 0. And this will be the amount of enemies that our spawner actually spawns. Also, while we're at it, let's go down here and let's add two functions that are both going to be empty. We'll add in a public static void level failure. We'll just copy that over and we'll make a level success. So level success. And in here, we'll just change our level over boolean to be true. So level over equals true, and we'll copy that down to here as well. So what I can actually do with these variables up here is, if they're kept track of properly, is we can calculate that if enemies destroyed plus enemies despawned equals total enemies, this actually means that there are no enemies on the screen. So we can use this to determine if it is supposed to be the next level or not. However, maybe the player destroyed all the enemies on the screen, but maybe there is a delay between the next enemy being spawned. So we don't want the game to end in that situation, so we have to add something into bullet hell spawner now. So let's go into bullet hell spawner, and we can actually change this bool has all spawned. Let's make this public static. And just at the bottom here in the spawn function, let's just make a little small change here, and we'll add bullet hell game manager dot total enemies plus plus. And I forgot to make these public, so we'll just go back and change that. Let's go back into bullet hell game manager, and let's just add the public tag to these static variables here. Okay, so now we're correctly incrementing our total enemies, but we still need to increment our enemies destroyed and enemies despawned. So firstly, let's go into our bullet hell car script, and what we'll actually do here is we're going to make our die function virtual. So we'll change this, instead of being protected void, we'll make this protected virtual void die. And now we can override this function in our child classes. And this is since you want two different things to happen if our enemies die or if our car dies. So let's go into our bullet hell enemy. And in this onTriggerEnter2D function, where we despawn the enemies, what we'll actually want to do is to increment our bullet hell game manager enemies despawned. So we'll go bullet hell game manager enemies despawned plus plus, and we'll just copy that over and put it down here as well. And now while we're here, there's also a small bug that we should fix, where if the player dies, the enemy will still try to find the player and shoot him. So let's fix this now. And what we're going to do later on is, if our player dies, we'll set level over to be true. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to check if bullet hell game manager dot level over. What we'll do is we'll return out of this function and it won't run. Okay, and just for the time being, we're going to need to create a little hotfix here, and which will be addressed later on. So we'll go game object player equals game object dot find object with tag player, and then we can check if our player has not been found. What we can do is we can return out of the function, so we don't get an error when we try to shoot at him. Also, we'll want to override the die function. So let's go at the bottom here. We'll go protected override void die, and we'll call this superclass base.die. So this will actually still destroy the game object, but what we'll also want to do is, specific to the enemy, we'll want to go bullet hell game manager enemies destroyed plus plus. Alright, so let's go back to bullet hell game manager, and in the update function, let's check for the things that we just mentioned. So what we can do is we can check if enemies despawned plus enemies destroyed equals to total enemies, and if our bullet hell spawner is finished spawning, so we'll do bullet hell spawner dot has all spawned, then we can actually call the level success function. So this means that the round is ended. So because this is in the update function and it's called once per frame, if the player wins the game, this level success will be called once per frame, so that isn't very good. So what we can do is we can go if level over, we can return out of the update function, and none of that will happen. So that's a good chunk of our level success logic done. So if there's no enemies on the screen and the spawner has finished spawning, the level will go to level success. So next up, let's do some simple level failure logic. So we'll go into the bullet hell player script, and just like we overrode the die function for the enemy, we'll do the same for the player. So at the bottom here, we'll just go protected override void die, and we'll call the base.die. And here, so when the player dies, what we'll want to do is we'll want to call the bullet hell game manager level failure function. Okay, so now we're calling level failure and level success whenever we need to end the round. So let's go back into bullet hell game manager, and we'll want to add two new references to game objects at the top here. So we'll have one for our failure canvas, so this is going to be public game object failure canvas, and we'll have another one for public game object success canvas. And these are going to be the EUI text elements that pop up when we win or lose the game. Okay, so before we go ahead and make those canvases, let's go ahead and finish our success and failure functions, since we don't really have anything in here right now. So in our level failure, it's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to go singleton.failureCanvas.setActive true. And so that's our level failure done for now. And in our level success, we'll just copy that over. And instead of failure canvas, we'll use success canvas. And not only that, but we will increment our current level. So we'll go current level ++. And also by default, we'll want these two canvases to be disabled. So I'm just going to copy one of these, and let's go into the awake function above our car prefab dictionary, and we'll just set our failure canvas to be false. And we don't need the singleton for this one. And we'll also set our success canvas to be false. Okay, so now we have the logic done so that our EUI messages will pop up on the screen whenever we win or lose. But how do we actually reset or go to the next level? So if you go to this update function here, we created this level over if earlier on. So what we can do here is we can actually check, for example, if the player presses spacebar, then we can call a function. So let's go if input.getKeyDown keycode.space for the spacebar. What we'll do is we'll call a new function, and we'll call this reset level. Let's go ahead and copy this reset level, and we'll put it underneath update. And this will be private void. So let's go ahead and write our reset level. So here what we'll want to do is we'll want to reset all of our variables that we've been incrementing to keep track of our level state. So these are the variables that we created at the start of this video. So let's go, we'll go level over equals false, enemies destroyed equals 0, enemies despawned equals 0, total enemies equals 0, and here we'll call scene manager dot load scene 0. Now here's the thing, in C#, if you don't have a correct library imported into your code, you can actually right click and go quick actions, and here we'll be able to import unity.scene management. So this is pretty handy for quite a lot of things in Unity. Actually, you can just right click and it'll get automatically imported. So let's explain a few things here. So what is a 0 here in our load scene? Well, if you go back into our editor and we go into File, Build Settings, here we have a list of all the scenes that are going to be included in the build of our game, and their index is on the right. So that's where load scene 0 comes from. We're just going to be reloading this scene here. And secondly, why are we resetting these variables when we're already resetting the level? Well, because these variables are static, they won't reset like the level does, so that's why we need to reset them and then reload the level. So I hope that makes sense. So we got our fail, success, and reset logic, and we're on the home stretch now. There's just a few more things to do. So we've already generalized our enemies' statistics and movesets and prefabs and etc. But there's one more little thing that we can do in Bullet Hell Game Manager to make things a lot easier. So let's actually change our spawn actions to be level based instead of just having this one set of spawn actions for the entire game. So let's keep our original spawn actions there. And what we'll do is we'll create a new public static dictionary, and the key will be an int, and the value will be a list of spawn action. And we'll call this spawn actions for level. And we'll want to initialize it. And then we can open it up just like we did with our previous dictionaries. So let's go ahead and add some values here. So I'm going to open up the curly brackets. I'm going to go 0. So this is going to be the spawn actions for our 0th level. And to make things a bit easier, let's go ahead and copy this bit of code right here. We'll copy it from new down to the end of the curly bracket there. And we'll paste it in here. And we'll have to get rid of the semicolon. And let's just make this look a little bit nicer. So there we go. And let's delete these previous spawn actions that we had here. So what's going to happen is now for each level we're going to have a different set of enemies that attack us from different positions. And if we're particularly lazy, we can reuse some things from our previous levels. So now it makes sense that when we complete our level, all we need to do is increment our current level, and then our enemy spawns will change accordingly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy paste all of these spawn actions in for the first 2 levels of the game. I'll also paste these in the description to the video, and I'll also be putting up the project files in the description if you'd like to download this project. Okay, so there's our current list of spawn actions. The first 2 levels are exactly the same, pretty much just for testing purposes, but later on we'll be adding in more enemies and more kind of varied things to do. And this is kind of handy as well because now we know exactly how many levels there are going to be in our game because we have the amount of keys in our dictionary. So in our level success function, what we can actually do is we're going to increment our current level. However, if current level plus 1 is greater than our spawn actions for level .keys .count, this means that we're trying to access a level that isn't possible. So this means that we've completed all of the levels. So what I want to do for now is we're going to reset our current level to 0. But I think later on we'll be able to put some end credits here or whatever you like. Okay. Also, we're going to need to reflect these changes in Bullet Hell Spawner for our new spawning. So let's go into that now. I'll go up to the top here and let's start with this one. So instead of Bullet Hell Game Manager.spawn actions, I want to go Bullet Hell Game Manager.spawn actions for level. And the key here is going to be our Bullet Hell Game Manager.current level. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this over and paste this over here. And I'm also going to paste this over here. Okay, so we've covered a lot so far, but there's one last thing to do, and that's these 2 canvases that I was talking about earlier on. So it's going to be our success and failure UI. So let's go into our editor here, and let's right click, and we're going to go to UI, and we're going to create a new canvas. So in Unity, a canvas is basically a 2D object which lets us draw, add UI and text, maybe make a HUD and so on. So I'll be given a more in-depth look at Unity UI in a later episode, but since this episode is already getting quite long, we'll just run through what we need to do. Let's save that for a later video. So inside our canvas, we'll want to create a new game object here. So we'll go create empty on top of our canvas. And let's rename this to failure. Okay, so then let's double click our failure game object, and we'll be brought into this kind of 2D UI where our canvas is represented by this larger box right here, and our failure game object is represented by this smaller one here. So let's go right ahead and click this little box tool up here, and I'll want to scale this up to our top and to the left and to the right. And we'll want the bottom to be just above half of our game screen. And then we'll want to grab these little triangle anchors here, and I'll drag these up into the corners so they fully fit the window that we just created. Then in here, we're going to right click on our failure, and we're going to back down to UI, and we're going to create a new text object. And I'll do the exact same thing for this. We're going to stretch our box over to fit the failure game object, and then we're going to do the same with the little triangles here. Then we'll want to tick this best fit button here. We'll set the color to be white, maybe increase the font size a little bit, center it vertically and horizontally, and what we want to do is we'll want to change this and call it game over, press spacebar to restart, and we'll just add some space between them. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now for our level success, what I want to do is we'll want to click on this failure and duplicate it over. We'll call this success. And let's go ahead and change the text to reflect something nice and cheery. So we'll go level complete, press spacebar to continue. Okay, and finally we'll want to go into our game manager, and we'll add these failure and success objects to their references. Okay, so let's go in game and let's see what happens. So you'll see that we have a lot of more enemies spawning now, and this is the level 0 enemies. So now I've been killed. Now the game is over. I'm just going to press spacebar, and now we're going to be back at level 0. So let's try not to get killed here, which is quite a bit hard. Alright, almost there. Alright, there's our level complete. Spacebar to continue. And now we'll be on level 1, even though all of the enemies are the same. Okay, so that's it for this episode. In this tutorial, we covered a good bit of level logic, and we introduced the basics of Unity Canvas. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.